as we're looking at putting the right content in front of these people at the right time, and then you see this percentage of 1% is the amount of time that they have available for doing training. And then we look at all the different methods that they're expecting to be able to interact with our content, with our courses, whether it's putting on the formal student hat or whether it's on the job. That word overwhelm really fit. Now, when I start looking at all the different ways of getting content in front of them and how to maintain that, that word overwhelm actually applies to the learning and training group as well, because it's no longer just about putting out a single monolithic course or just a single piece of content. So when we look at a lot of the challenges that really face us when we start looking at all these different ways to access content and put it in front of the modern learner, I'll take a really simple example. Maybe it's a standard operating procedure, or maybe a policy, or something that needs to go out to multiple people in multiple modes. And when we look at the typical way of dealing with this, I call it the file save as problem, because we'll open up the original source document and then somebody will say, oh, we need a PDF of that. We need it in an e-learning course, and we need to make sure we have some reference material as well. And oh yeah, and we need to include it in the webinar that's going to go out. So we need a PowerPoint. So file save as, or file copy paste, right? It's really easy to do this. And then we start looking at the different audiences that we have to support and how we have to contextualize that content and make sure it applies to the people, whether it's regional differences, maybe it's differences of job titles and what they're responsible for, but we're always tweaking it for those different audiences. And then we look at file save as, or opening up our desktop authoring tools and taking a look at the content that may have been optimized for a printed piece of paper, but we want it on desktop, we want it on mobile, we want it on tablets, and oftentimes we have to go in and reformat it so it's going to look right and still be a great experience for them. And if you have multiple languages you have to support, once again, we're taking all that content, all those different derivatives, and having to create all the different languages. Now, the thing is, at the end of the day, this actually isn't that painful. In fact, it's pretty easy to go from that original source document, file save as, or copy paste our way, all the way to this massive content. The problem is, how do we keep it up to date? Micro-learning or bite-sized learning is one of the newer buzz terms in our industry. And if we just look at it as a really simple definition, it's really taking your content and looking at how can we make it small. So it's anywhere from a short 20-second clip, maybe up to a 20-minute lesson. Having it be focused on singular topics or content or singular objective. And then the key here is modular, so that it can be used in a standalone fashion, or it could be combined with other small bite-sized learning chunks so that you can do things with it that allow things to scale to the number of audiences and the multiple modes that you need to do. And the last part is those little chunks being reusable, being able to support multiple audiences, multiple delivery modes, multiple devices. Doing that. Well, the first part is, again, let's take a look at that whole content lifecycle of what do we need to do first? And that first step is really analyzing and understanding where we are in the overall process. What do we actually have? What makes sense for us to begin building into those smaller chunks that we started talking about earlier? So from the analyzed point of view, one of the first places you can start very easily is just looking at your different audiences that you're having to support and the different content that you're having to support them with, and start looking for those overlaps. And those overlaps are often a gold mine for content that you can build one time and get a lot of mileage out of it, being able to support all these different audiences or perhaps different output modes that you need for these different audiences. Design phase where we're looking through, we're finding that overlap. How do we go about actually creating content that's going to work for this context? As we have these smaller chunks of content, as we've identified them, start looking at how we can take those and create different assemblies, perhaps for different delivery modes, e-learning, instructor-led training, performance support, maybe micro-learning refreshers or pre-work before a class, as well as supporting assemblies for different audiences. So the key to this actually even being possible is the concept that we call single source authoring. And the way our system is set up from an authoring perspective, we have a structured authoring environment. It's very Google Docs-like. And as you're building content, you're automatically, without having to do anything special, you're getting all these small building blocks, these small granular chunks of content. Again, the whole flexibility of once you've built this, it's no longer a course or a slide deck or an e-learning module. Instead, it's content. It's a business asset. It's something that you can use and leverage to create all these different outputs. Now, where this gets really interesting and really powerful is when you start looking at being able to take that content, those blocks, and link and reuse them. So maybe something starts off, maybe you have instructor-led training material right now or material you're using for a webinar, and you need to create an e-learning equivalent. Well, we all know it's not a one-for-one. The instructor provides a lot of the content just by speaking. And so you've got to write in and provide that contextualized content. But being able to take those base building blocks and leverage those. And whether it's in a full e-learning course, or maybe it's the pre-course that happens before you go to class, or maybe it's the refresher that happens 4 to 6 weeks later, you're not having to recreate all this content. Instead, this content is built one time. And the beauty of it is, when it comes time to maintain and update that, you can change this content in any one location, and it'll change everywhere that it's linked and reused. So when we start talking about that content explosion and how you start reining that in, it's by taking the content, writing it in a way that it's reusable, linking it where it can be used the same way, and then providing that contextual information that's going to make sense for those different outputs, or if we're looking at audiences, contextualizing it for the different audiences. And so within our system, going back to this single source format, remember it's stored as XML. The publishing themes are going to take care of all that layout for me, and I can get to all these end guides. So at the end of this, being able to publish all these different formats gets you to the point where you can deliver the content. But being able to take that content in Studio, that's the authoring environment that we're talking about, and being able to centrally publish that to the second half of our platform, which we call Content Delivery Service. Now, Content Delivery Service, you'll hear me call it CDS. CDS is all about getting your content out everywhere that it needs to be. Now, the number one use case that we have a learning management system, or maybe we have 5. For CDS, it doesn't matter, because CDS acts as that back-end warehouse that's going to store all your final finished content. So with that, once you have built your content, you've published it to CDS, and you begin putting it out in front of the learner, as we like to say, in the path of the learner at the time of need. We go back to that learning lifecycle diagram of, we need to analyze what's going on with that.
So as we start to think about this, it's been really powerful for me in regards to letting go of the idea that there's one system where people are going to go to get everything that they need from a learning, from a performance, from an enablement perspective, and empower them in as many different ways as we can. One of the ways that we've been able to do this in a powerful way is to actually look at different channels by which we can make the same type of thing available to people simultaneously. So as Mike's been sharing, there's lots of different ways people might experience it. They might experience it in a formal learning system like an LMS. We might also want them to experience it in our intranet site. We might also want them to experience it in applications they already use to do their work, so on and so forth. It's really not the case where we're going to define one system by which everyone interacts with all the time. In fact, we can actually take those experiences and make them available from multiple points of contact. Now, that would be a really scary proposition if, in fact, each one of those systems was creating its own analytics or reports around what people are doing. That wouldn't give me the information that I want. What we actually have the capability of doing, once again, through CDS, is giving the visibility as to all the different places that people are accessing information, and allowing us to really correlate that back to other pieces beyond just what's happening in the system itself. So having those analytics and being able to correlate those back to outcomes are incredibly important to us, not only to show the efficacy of the original strategy that we put into place, but once again, allow us to adapt in a flexible and agile and dynamic way to make sure that that strategy continues to hold true and drive the behavior change over time. So a few key points that I'll point out here that make our strategy resonate and successful in terms of how we can deliver for the business. The first is that content is a reusable business asset. That's something that Mike's hit on several times during this presentation, and I think it's really important for us to understand. Everything that we put into place is a business asset, and we want to maximize the ability for people to experience that in meaningful ways. And that requires us to think about it differently. Second thing, content's not a course. It could be a course, it can manifest as a course, but it can manifest in a million other ways that aren't part of a formal learning experience as well. So how do we think about that significantly differently from the start? We definitely want to separate that content from presentation if we can. We also want to separate content from context. When we've talked about before this idea that people might engage with content in different ways, in different flows of their work, or even flows of their career. So if we bake all of the experiences into the content in a way in which we can't repurpose or make that available for people in different experiences, it's significantly harder to reuse or even to resonate with your audience in regards to building those pieces. And then the last piece really speaks to experience content when needed. We really want to make sure that we are providing that experience around the content itself, and that we're a part of that experience as well. So, you know, when we're thinking about what we're designing, what we're making available, what does that experience look like? Are we in touch with it? Are we connected with it? Does it resonate with us? Is it meeting our need? So those are all big principles around that particular mindset shift that I think are really critical as you start to explore this from an organizational perspective.
It's really about thinking about your content differently. It's moving away from building courses, building handouts, building guidebooks, to building business assets. Being able to maximize your content by extracting out content from the training that you have today. You've got some great, amazing content in what you've already built. So much of this strategy hinges on the ability to chunk up your content so that you have the freedom and flexibility to put it into the assemblies that make sense for your different modes, your different outputs, your different audiences. And when we look at bite-sized learning, it really is, it's both an end product in and of itself, because those chunks can be delivered as standalone. But when you put it inside of a larger strategy so that you can build and repurpose that content, deliver it out in multiple channels so that it can be impactful at the time of need. And then the key part is being able to measure this. How can learning and training really have a seat at the business table? How can we show the impact that we're making within our organizations? How can we have hard data that backs up what our gut intuition may be telling us? Or how can that data actually help correct maybe a misinformed gut reaction to what we're doing? Being able to see that ROI and hard data is going to impact how you can do business. And at the end of the day, we're all about learners. We want to make a behavioral change. We want to impact people's lives and how they're doing work. And this is a key aspect. This is part of that content strategy. This is the end goal.